Good morning, my name is Ashley Owens and this is my presentation on smartphones and teen mental health. These are my audience members and I'm going to start. So, the world is a very different place today than it was when I grew up. I was a Gen X kid and we didn't have electronics in our back pockets. We were lucky if we had a Walkman to listen to our favorite songs, and if we wanted to watch a movie, we usually just walked to the nearest movie theater. We knew where every payphone was in the neighborhood, so you could quickly call collect for a ride home. Come pick me up! The world seemed a little bit more innocent and a lot more safe. I remember in 8th grade I was asked to write a research paper utilizing the internet, which had only been in public schools for about a year. We were taught how to use a search engine, and it all felt very confusing to my 14-year-old brain. I remember even at that age feeling like the internet was too much information at your fingertips, too much stimulus for kids. That was way before social media apps and smartphones. Let's take a look at the timeline for the mobile phone. In an article by Jessie Chantel written in 2020, she discusses how smartphones came to be. In 1984 was the very first smartphone, was debuted by Motorola at the hefty price tag of $4,000. It was big and bulky and boasted a battery life of 30 minutes. That obviously didn't work for most people. In 1994, IBM announced their first smartphone. It was a little more sleek in design and the battery life was a little over an hour. How nice. It cost about $1,100, and in 1994, that was a good chunk of change. Remember the first time you played Snake on your phone? That was the very first ever mobile gaming app released in 1997, which led the gaming industry to what it is now, over a $100 billion industry. The very first camera phone was introduced in 2000 by a Japanese company, but it only boasted 110 megapixels versus the 12 megapixel camera the iPhone 13 has today. The real leap that phones made was in the early 2000s when smartphones gained access to the internet. In 2001, smartphones could connect wirelessly to the 3G network, and this was revolutionary to those in the business world, allowing them to send emails via the World Wide Web and even sitting in on video conference calls from across the country. Then, in 2007, Apple released their very first iPhone. Steve Jobs himself said, I quote, "This technology is a revolutionary and magical product that is literally 5 years ahead of any other mobile phone," end quote. It was the most advanced smartphone the world had ever seen. In its first year on the market, Apple sold an upwards of 1.4 million iPhones. By 2008, that number skyrocketed to 11.6 million iPhones sold. The world has obviously never looked back. Apple has released 22 models of the iPhone since 2008, and this has expanded to other things like AirPods, Apple Watches, and MacBooks. Smartphones obviously revolutionized the way we communicate over the past decade. As Chantel states, texting has become the preferred method of communication for everything from marketing products to delivering stellar customer service. Businesses around the world are thriving in this tech-savvy world. But what about our kids? What has technology done for them? Being a Gen X kid, I didn't have a smartphone. I got my first phone when I was 18, and even then it just had simple features like talk and text. It didn't even have a touchscreen. According to Anne Marie Albano, PhD and director of Columbia University Clinic for Anxiety and Related Disorders, the age that kids are opening social media accounts is 12 and a half. According to a study she and her colleagues conducted, the high levels of social media use over the span of 4 years was associated with increased risks of depression among middle and high school youth. Furthermore, a study by Pew Research found that 45% of teens admit that they are online almost constantly. How alarming. Kids are supposed to be outside playing with friends, playing sports, and doing homework, not on social media. In a well-known study by Jean Twenge, PhD and professor at San Diego State University, she found that among teens that used electronics 5 or more hours per day, 48% at least had at least one related suicide outcome. And those teens using devices 5 or more hours per day versus 1 hour per day were 66% more likely to have a suicide-related outcome. Those odds are frightening and in dire need of intervention. We must save these kids. In an article by Time magazine, Frances Jensen, the chair of neurology at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine, states, quote, "What this generation is going through right now with technology is a giant experiment, and our kids are the guinea pigs," end quote. Between 2010 and 2016, the number of adolescents who experienced at least one major depressive episode leapt by 60%, according to a nationwide survey conducted by the Department of Health and Human Services. Of the 17,000 kids surveyed, 13% of them had at least one major depressive episode the prior year. According to the CDC, suicide deaths among peoples aged 10 to 19 have risen dramatically, reaching a 40-year high. Dr. Twenge states that these sharp climbs in suicide rates are among teens are unprecedented and require intervention. I believe that this issue with teen mental health and smartphone use isn't just about screen time. For most of us, with the social media apps and how it makes us feel as adults. Have you ever put your phone down after an hour of scrolling only to feel more worthless and less than? As Albano states, we are living in a culture of comparison, and even as an adult, we find ourselves slipping down the slope of unworthiness. If we can't even handle the pressure, how can we expect our kids to deal with it? Their brains are immature and are still making connections well into their 20s. Albano states, teens are looking at these sites through a negative lens of, I'm never going to be as good as those people. And that mindset puts them at risk for developing depression and becoming isolated. These factors all contribute to the increased suicide risk. But how do we help these kids? Allison Silvestri, a principal at San Lorenzo High School in California, has teamed up with a company called Yonder, who makes lockable phone pouches, where kids place their devices in the case and they are locked during school hours. Silvestri states that since implementing this restriction on phones, the changes have been profound. She states that kids are more focused and engaged during class. The students' journals reflect that they are less stressed, and the school has seen fewer physical fights. Silvestri attributes the positive outcome to less screen time during school hours. There's more face-to-face interaction and more joy in the classroom. Silvestri states that many parents have inquired about how they can buy one of these lockable pouches for home use because it's working. These findings about smartphones and teen mental health need to be at the forefront of our minds as parents and leaders raising the next generation. We must save these kids.